The manufacturers have known all of this stuff for years. In fact, there have been gun dealers caught on videotape engaging in blatant straw purchases where on the videotape, the guy comes in and says, I'm a felon. That's why I'm going to have my friend buy the gun. And the dealer sells the friend the gun. That is a felony. And there have been dealers caught on videotape. The manufacturer's response to that is, I'm going to keep on supplying them guns unless and until ATF takes their license away. So that gets to what the manufacturer's attitude is about this.
Time for our favorite podcast. Cut to the chase. The United States Supreme Court made another ruling on guns, and I'm sure you want to know. And what better way to know than bring back Jonathan Lowy, attorney for Global Action, a leading voice in gun policy and legal reform. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you, Gregg?
I'm doing, about as good as I could do at this point. All right. So this is not a Second Amendment decision. So for my friends and followers that are very Second Amendment friendly, don't worry. Okay. So Jonathan, this has gone up to the Supreme Court. You were the attorney. We representing Estados Unidos Mexicanos versus Smith and Wesson. So let's talk about the decision. What was it about? What was, some of the facts underlying the issue? Let's first talk about what was going on in Mexico and what gave rise to this litigation.
Sure. This case originated because for a number of years, there has been a flood of guns that are illegally trafficked from the United States to Mexico. Mexico has very strong gun laws. They, for many years, had only one gun dealer in the entire country, and it was a gun dealer that was run by the government on a military base in Mexico City. And it's extremely difficult for criminals to get guns. It's a lot harder for law-abiding people to get guns there than certainly in the United States. But guns are legal, but they're regulated by caliber, and the cartels and others cannot go to the gun store on the military base and buy guns. So what they do is they do the same thing that criminals in places in the United States that have very tough gun laws do, which is go to where it is easy to get guns, and that is across the border in the United States, particularly in gun shops in Texas and Arizona, but other states as well. And what the cartels do is they send people who will recruit straw buyers who will find gun stores that are more than happy to supply them with guns, and they will buy dozens and dozens of assault rifles, sniper rifles that can shoot down helicopters. And they do this in a rather blatant way, usually. You have gun traffickers who are going into gun stores, maybe buying 5, 10 AR 50 caliber sniper rifles that cost several $1,000s, paying thousands of dollars, often in cash. And then they come back maybe a week or two later and buy another van full, and then they'll come back. And it's, pretty obvious that those are gun traffickers. And if you're along the border, it's pretty obvious that they're trafficking guns into Mexico for use by the cartels. And to be clear, Gregg, you started out about that this is not about the Second Amendment. That's perfectly right. And in my view, people who believe strongly in their Second Amendment rights and their gun rights, should be supporting what I'm talking about, because the fact is, most gun dealers in the United States, over 90% of gun dealers in the United States, are law-abiding, responsible business people, And when they would see someone coming into their store who wants to buy a dozen assault rifles and does it again the next week, they say no. They call up law enforcement. They don't want anything to do with supplying the criminal market. To their credit, it's really pretty extraordinary how good a job most gun dealers do. Problem is, there's a small percentage of bad apples, as there are in any industry, including the law, and they are the ones who are selling virtually all the crime guns. And to wrap this up, the the part of the problem with Mexico is you've got these gun dealers and you got these manufacturers who are feeding this crime gun supply, and they could end the crime gun pipeline if they simply said, we're only going to sell our guns through the 90 plus percentage of gun dealers that are law abiding responsible. And we're not going to supply these bad actors. But the manufacturers, unfortunately, choose to supply the worst of the worst gun dealers, and that's how the crime gun pipeline into Mexico is supplied. So to deal with this problem, Mexico brought a lawsuit, and myself and my organization, Global Action on Gun Violence, are co-counsel in that case. And they sued the major gun manufacturers in the U.S. And what I've explained is basically what their theory was, is it's certainly negligent to be deliberately selling your guns through dealers that you have every reason to know are supplying criminal traffickers. And beyond that, it is unlawful. It is aiding and abetting illegal downstream sales. So that was Mexico's case against the manufacturers.
All right. So Mexico sues Smith and Wesson. What was their theory? I mean, you can't just sue a company because you don't like what's going on. There has to be a legal theory. What was their legal theory, and what were they asking the court to do?
Well, the legal theory essentially was negligence, that is, failure to use reasonable care. And if your theory is that if you're a gun manufacturer and you're using reasonable care, you make sure that your sales and distribution practices are reasonably safe and not leading to foreseeable injury to other people. And in the case of gun manufacturers, for over 20 years, manufacturers have been told by the Department of Justice, by ATF, by insiders in the gun industry that they should not be supplying these bad actor gun dealers. When I say the bad actor gun dealers, I mean the 1% of gun dealers that sell about 60% of crime guns, the 5% of gun dealers that sell about 90% of crime guns. And again, they've been told this, these manufacturers, and they have refused. And in fact, about 20 years ago, Smith and Wesson, in a settlement of other litigation, agreed that they would stop supplying these bad actors. They agreed that they would have standards for their gun dealers, that the dealers would be trained, and they would not be supplying traffickers and straw buyers. They would have safe sales practices. They then walked away from that settlement. But so that was the basic theory, simple negligence. However, because the gun industry has a special federal protection from liability that no other industry, no other people in the United States has, it was a giveaway to the gun industry, to the gun lobby, called the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. Because of that law, you can't simply, in most cases, allege negligence as you would against any other industry. Instead, to get out from under the special protection of this terrible, unjust law, you have to prove unlawful conduct, illegal conduct. So Mexico alleged not just negligence, but that the manufacturers were aiding and abetting the illegal sales by their downstream dealers because they were deliberately supplying these dealers that they had every reason to know were illegally selling guns to traffickers. And that last point about aiding and abetting is what will get us to the issue that the Supreme Court considered.
Okay, I still want to talk a little bit about the factual situation, and I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate. So you're talking about the bad actors, dealers that are you saying that these dealers, the bad actors, actually know that they're selling to the cartel, criminal traffickers and all that? Or is this one of these they should have known? Or is it a combination? And if
It's
and
com-
then what's your support for your position?
Sure. I mean, it's a combination. I mean, there have been some dealers, and I would invite people to read the complaint that Mexico filed. It's on our website, actiononguns.org, and you'll see facts from federal prosecutions and other authority. And there's one dealer, for example, that was caught on wiretap, on audio tape, conspiring with cartel gun traffickers. And where the gun dealer, the owner of the gun store, of a licensed gun dealer, was advising the traffickers, here's how to structure your sales to minimize the risks you're going to get on ATF's radar, and that you're going to, here's how you can get around law enforcement. And that gun dealer sold hundreds of guns that went across the border to the cartels. So that's an example of a dealer, unquestionably knowing. Then there are other dealers where it's not that clear, but it's pretty darn clear. I mean, if somebody is coming into your gun store saying, I want to buy a several $1,000 50 caliber sniper rifle, which is a true military weapon. It's got a range of a mile.
Hmm.
It can shoot helicopters out of the sky. This is something Osama bin Laden was trying to get 50 caliber sniper rifles back in the day. If you're someone who wants to buy that gun and maybe toss in 5 or 10 AR-15s and a few hundred rounds of ammunition, and then bad enough, maybe you come back a week or two later and you want another batch of the same, that's to me stronger than should have known. That is, exactly what's going on. Maybe you're engaging in what the law calls willful blindness, which is you're refusing to acknowledge what is obvious before your eyes, but and those are most of the cases that we're talking about as far as what these dealers are doing. And the manufacturers have known all of this stuff for years. In fact, there have been gun dealers caught on videotape engaging in blatant straw purchases where on the videotape, the guy comes in and says, I'm a felon. That's why I'm going to have my friend buy the gun. And the dealer sells the friend the gun. That is a felony. And there have been dealers caught on videotape. The manufacturer's response to that is, I'm going to keep on supplying them guns unless and until ATF takes their license away. So that gets to what the manufacturer's attitude is about this.
Okay, all right. So let's get into a little bit of the legalese here. Um, the Federal Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. What a great name. So that's their basic defense to negligence, which and the workaround on that is if the dealer is engaged in illegal activity. In other words, they are knowingly selling to traffickers or, people that are committing crimes. And you were talking about aiding and abetting. And so I'm assuming that the aiding and abetting is the sale to bad actors, knowing that they're bad actors, or that they have given indications, blatant indications that they're, gonna be selling to, or the people they're selling to are bad. So the case gets, just for those that are not that savvy about litigation and all that, the case goes and gets filed in trial court, and then there's a ruling in the trial court that gets appealed to an intermediate appellate court. Then that appellate court makes a decision, and then the Supreme Court decides whether they're going to take that up or not. They decided to take that up. So leading up to this, I'd like to know, did did Smith and Wesson dispute the facts that we're talking about here?
Well, in fairness to them, they never had the opportunity because it never got to that stage. Because what happened was, we, government of Mexico, files the complaint. Then there's a motion to dismiss filed that argues simply, even if these facts are all true, we have a get out of court free card that Congress has given us called the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. And so the court can't touch us. And that was essentially their argument. And then we argued it whether the main argument was, did we come under this exception, which is the what's known as the predicate exception for knowing violations of statutory law. And that was the issue. And to be clear, if it wasn't, if this special protection law did not exist, if the gun industry was governed by the same rules of civil justice that everyone else in the United States is governed by, we would never have been in the Supreme Court. There wouldn't have been a motion to dismiss. We'd be sailing off in discovery right now, and Smith and Wesson would have every opportunity to defend itself. I don't think they'd have very good answers, but they'd have that opportunity, and we'd have our opportunity to prove that what we're saying is true. The only reason that this case ever got to the Supreme Court is because, again, the gun industry alone is governed by a set of rules that is far different and far less than every other industry or people in the United States.
All right. So now we go to the intermediate appellate court, and they rule in your favor unanimously.
Yes. The First Circuit Court of Appeals, three-judge panel, ruled unanimously that we satisfied what's called the predicate exception, and that is that the allegations that Mexico brought supported that the manufacturers aid and abet downstream sales. And just, to give an example of what I mean by that, Gregg, let's say, you've been told by law enforcement, by FBI, Department of Justice, prosecutors, that I illegally am involved in the trafficking of guns. And I've been doing that for quite some time. And I do that by selling 5, 10 assault rifles at a time to traffickers who are working for drug cartels in Mexico. Now, if you, with that information, continue to keep supplying me with guns, our argument was, you're aiding and abetting illegal sales. You can't simply say, John, I'm selling you more and more guns, and I'm profiting off that, and, I'm going to act like nobody told me what you're doing with these things. So that in a sense, was our argument, and that in some cases, like the one I told you, the manufacturers know or should know that this dealer specific dealers are, conspiring even with cartel traffickers.
Okay. So now the case goes up to the Supreme Court. Was this the first time you've been in front of the Supreme Court?
Yes, it's the first time I've been directly, and that in itself was maybe the worst mistake the Supreme Court made was that they really had no business taking this case. There was no circuit split. There was no body of case law on these issues. I mean, any of the metrics that Supreme Court supposedly uses in deciding whether to take a case, none of them were close to applying in this case. Smith and Wesson argued that there was a circuit split. I could go into why that was just totally absurd. The only issue that they were raising was about PLACA, and what they called a circuit split was reaching back to cases that were years before PLACA and had nothing to do with PLACA. So it could not have been a circuit split. And then, once the Supreme Court took the case, there was never a mention of any circuit split again. All that disappeared in the air. Nothing, we never mentioned it because it didn't exist. So that was a rather surprising and clearly unsupported by the law, and the court took the case.
All right. And just, you've got your organization, it's a nonprofit group. And before we even get into the Supreme Court, tell us a little bit about how you got involved, what your group does, how long they've been around. Is this case its only battle? What's going on with all that?
Well, I mean, I've been working full time on litigation to reduce gun violence and gun trafficking for almost 30 years. And for the past 3 years, I have been leading global action on gun violence. And our work is focused on stopping gun trafficking, that is the diversion of guns from the legal market to the illegal market. And we have a particular focus, though not exclusive, on the problem of guns being trafficked from the United States to other countries, countries that for the most part have strong gun policies, but guns are trafficked across the border and used to arm criminals there. And part of our work is representing the government of Mexico, both in the case we're discussing and another case, but also we are assisting other countries like Bahamas. We're involved in a case in Canada involving a mass shooting in Toronto, and we're active in human rights regime. We have a human rights action pending in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We speak at the United Nations and the Organization of American States. And all of this is intended to take action and build pressure to stop gun trafficking. And I think and I hope that is something that everyone can agree on. Maybe not the gun traffickers and the gangs that are being supplied by them, but everyone else. And my friends who are gun owners and major supporters of their right to have a gun agree that they are the last people that want to see guns diverted into the criminal market. So we're not a political organization, and I do think it's a focus that can unite people. And it's something where the Trump administration, I think what everyone feels about other issues, I think most people would agree that it's a good thing that to crack down on the problems posed by organized crime, including in Mexico as well as in the United States. So that is our focus, and the case that went to Supreme Court is one of our cases, but not all, and we also have other cases in the pipeline that we'll be filing soon.
All right. And so is a lot of this information on your organization's website? For those
That's
that want
right.
to get
Action on Guns, actiononguns.org is our website. You can certainly read more, and you can sign up for updates and learn more.
Gotcha. All right. So now we're in front of the Supreme Court. What did they do? What was the ruling and rationale and all that stuff?
Sure. Well, I mean, the Supreme Court took two questions that were presented by Smith and Wesson. Um, the first question was Smith and Wesson argued, and I'm not quoting, so it's, but basically they said that they, the manufacturers, could not be deemed the proximate cause of harm as a result of their conduct, or that the harm caused by Mexico, caused to Mexico, could not be deemed the proximate results of their conduct. And then secondly, they argued that the allegations could not support aiding and abetting liability. And we contested both of those, but importantly, we always thought that the aiding and abetting question was a much narrower question. The proximate cause question, we believe we were right in both of those, that they were the proximate cause and that they do aid and abet. But if the Supreme Court were to decide that proximate cause question, and if they were to accept the gun industry's arguments on proximate cause, it would have been virtually impossible to ever hold a gun manufacturer or even a gun dealer liable for anything, because they were essentially arguing that it's just the criminal's fault, and we're always insulated from the criminal conduct because we just sell a gun to a distributor who then sells it to the dealer, so it can never be our problem, even if we know and we deliberately are facilitating these these acts. So that was a very dangerous issue. So we always obviously hoped we could win. We thought we should win. But the worst case scenario was a sweeping ruling, particularly on the proximate cause issue. And the court, unfortunately, the court ruled against us. Fortunately, the court did not consider the proximate cause issue. And the court said, these allegations don't support aiding and abetting liability under the predicate exception of FLACA. So we don't need to address proximate cause. So, it's interesting because, we thought all along that obviously we wanted to win this case. We realized there's tremendous difficulty in a rather conservative Supreme Court, and you had a mix of hot button issues, guns, corporate liability, Mexico, Mexico bringing a suit against the gun industry. I mean, these are a host of conservative issues with a rather conservative court. But we always thought, if we were to lose this case, probably the best way to lose the case would be to lose 9-0 with an opinion written by someone like Justice Kagan. That might be counterintuitive to, particularly to sports fans who think isn't 5-4 better than 9-0. But, of course, if it's 5-4, you've got a very divided court, or in these days 6-3. And but if you have a 9-0 decision, you have the moderating influence, right? And you're reaching some sort of compromise. And so what we ended up with was a 9-0 decision written by Justice Kagan. Very narrow. So again, we don't think we should have lost, but if you're going to lose, this was really about the best way you could, because it was a decision that simply said, we're not going to address proximate cause. We're not changing the law in any way as far as that, but if you're alleging aiding and abetting against a gun manufacturer, that they aided and abetted a downstream sale, you need to have more particularized allegations about the manufacturer's participation with specific dealers and perhaps specific sales. And what you've alleged is not sufficient. So that, it deals with a narrow class of cases like the one that Mexico brought, but it doesn't shut the door to future litigation, doesn't even shut the door to us bringing the same sort of theory. You just have a higher, quantum of allegations and proof that you need to meet.
All right, so let's go back to that one example where they, were basically the dealers were caught on tape, saying, "Hey, we know we're selling to the cartel or traffickers. Why couldn't you, in your allegations, use that particular set of facts? Wouldn't that be detailed enough to show aiding and abetting?"
So I think that it would. I mean, I think it's, the I think that it's pretty clear that if you alleged those sorts of facts plus some specific illegal sales, that would be enough. And certainly if you alleged, that sort of misconduct that the manufacturers knew about it, plus specific sales that caused harm to the plaintiff, that would be enough. What the court was saying is essentially you didn't have all those elements. Like maybe you had some specifics about illegal sales by certain dealers, then you had some specifics about certain dealers, clearly violating the law, and then you had some details about Mexico being harmed by, U.S. guns. But, this is sort of the court seemed to be saying, you didn't have those stars all aligned in, against, one particular defendant. And, so, if you can get those sorts of facts, I think there's no question you could pursue a case like this. I think even lesser facts would be enough, but they've said that we alleged was not enough.
All right, and so one of the other issues that you raised was the ATF and the licensing and all that. What's stopping them from shutting these bad dealers down? I mean, has that been um, explored? Have they been pressured to, look into this and clean it up?
Well, I mean, there's always been a problem with that ATF has not focused, in my mind, sufficiently on the gun industry contribution to gun trafficking and gun dealers. And basically, ATF, one, they have very limited resources. The law handcuffs them in various ways to make it very difficult for them to ultimately prosecute or even revoke the license of a gun dealer. And then they have political pressure where I've been told by ATF officials over the years that they're terrified of the NRA, and that they're hanging on to this very small budget. They've got some people in Congress who want to eliminate them entirely as an agency. And in fact, in the current administration, that very well, that could happen. And they're terrified that if they took on the gun industry, they're going to get their budget slashed even more, if not totally eliminated. So basically, what ATF has decided over the years is, look, we want to do what we can to stop gun violence, to stop gun trafficking. I mean, these are, well-intentioned law enforcement officers, but given all of these constraints that how difficult it is and the costs that could come from taking on a gun dealer, and the fact that we need gun dealers' testimony to prosecute the trafficker, what they've decided is we're just going to go after the traffickers. We're going to go after the guy that went into the store and to buy the 10 guns. We're not going to do anything, though, about the dealer who sold him the 10 guns and will sell the next gun dealer next gun trafficker, 10 more guns. And so, that's what's happened. There have been news reports in USA Today and elsewhere about, even in some of the rare cases where ATF people recommend that a dealer get their license revoked, that managers overruled them and said, no, we're keeping their license. So it really, sometimes it happens. Occasionally it happens when a dealer is sort of caught dead to rights. But other than that, it rarely happens that a dealer loses their license. And, that was actually part of the allegations of Mexico's case we had in the complaint was, manufacturers know all this. They know that ATF's not going to take away the licenses of most gun dealers, and they can get away with breaking the law for many years. And yet they then use that as an excuse. And they say, well, I assume if somebody has a license that they're law abiding. Well, they know for a fact that that's not true. In some cases, they have seen the video on television of the dealer breaking the law. The fact that they can keep their license and that, does not change the fact that they saw them break the law. And the manufacturers know the reality that ATF is often, not going to revoke the license, of those dealers.
Okay, so I would imagine you could probably predict my next question, but where do you, Global Action, your movement go from here?
Well, I mean, as I said, thankfully, the Supreme Court's decision, was very narrow. And, we held our breath about what the court could do, and it could have done some really terrible things. The gun industry asked them to. The manufacturers were arguing for very sweeping rules, which would have made it very difficult to hold them accountable. Manufacturers lost in virtually all of those arguments. So, I mean, the bad news is we lost this case. Good news is we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep bringing suits. The court left the door wide open. You can't bring exactly the same suit that we brought, but there are other sorts of suits that you can bring. You can certainly bring suits against gun dealers. My organization are prosecuting a civil lawsuit on behalf of the government of Mexico against 5 gun dealers in Arizona. That's not affected at all by the Supreme Court's decision. There certainly will be other lawsuits by my organization and by others against other gun dealers, against other distributors, and against manufacturers for different theories. We're also foreign legal counsel in a case that I mentioned in Canada. And actually just the other day, a court of appeals in Ontario, Canada, held that in that case, and these are victims of a mass shooting in Toronto, could proceed as a class action. And that sort of case is interesting because since it was brought in Canada, PLACA has no effect. I mean, it's against Smith and Wesson, but there is no PLACA in Canada. There's no PLACA anywhere else. So that can, Smith and Wesson could be fully accountable without that special protection. We will continue to do all of that, including, raising awareness. And, I would say part of that message, and I think it's a unifying message, is, across the political spectrum, and including, Trump administration, it is talked about the harms that the cartels in Mexico are causing in the United States, right? They're leading to fentanyl trafficking throughout U.S. communities. That cartels are expanding their reach and organized crime in cities across the United States. The violence in Mexico is driving migration. That's such a big issue in the United States. All of those problems would not happen if you didn't have this crime gun pipeline of estimated 250,000 guns by some estimates every year going across the border. I mean, that's what's arming the cartels. That's what's allowing them to engage in the criminal activity, the fentanyl trafficking. That's what's causing the violence that's sending people to cross the border to the United States for safety. So, if you're serious about all of those problems, and people across the political spectrum are, then you got to shut down the crime gun pipeline that's supplying them. And again, that does not affect law-abiding gun owners and responsible gun dealers, who are most gun dealers and most gun owners. I think they're all on, our side. And so I do think it's something we can all join together in.
All right. So for those that are on your side, and I hope it's everybody, what can we do? What's our call to action?
Well, an easy one is go on actiononguns.org and just, sign up on our email list. If you would like, you can donate to us. We're a nonprofit, 501c3. And if you're on our email list, you'll keep up to date on, what's going on. And there'll be opportunities for for engagement. I would say, if you're, lawyers around the country, and when you're reading about criminal shootings, try to dig a little deeper about, how did that guy get the gun? It may not be obvious in the article, but that's the makings of a lawsuit. If you can, put those pieces together. How did they get the gun? Usually, in my experience, doing this for, almost 30 years, it's usually because some gun company did something wrong at some point. It doesn't just happen that criminals get guns. Sometimes they steal them, but it is generally, a gun dealer did something wrong. So, dig deeper, and then, if you got questions, certainly you can reach out to me and my organization, and we can advise you. And so stay engaged, stay aware, and then just be ambassadors about this issue. And my theme would be to cut across the politics of this. Let's put aside where we're going to differ, and let's get united around what we can agree on.
All right. So everybody, you need to share this episode to spread the word. Even if you have guns and you're pro-gun, I hope you give this episode a deep, honest listen, and not like you're afraid we're going to come and take your guns away. Oh my God. We're left-wing liberals, and, we want butterfly nets and all that. No, that's not the case. All right. The other things you should do are to subscribe and rate the show and all that. I'm going to drop all Jonathan's information. So if you want to get on his newsletter, which you should, so you can continue to see there are other cases in the pipeline, and we're going to skin this baby. Us lawyers, we know how to get the job done. All right. And Jonathan, thank you for all you're doing. I don't want to take up any more of your time, because you got a lot of work to do, and the week is not over. All right. So thank you for coming on and sharing this information with us, Jonathan.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Gregg.
All right. Have a good day. All right. That'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. I already gave you the call to action, so go stay safe.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most, or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.